You are listening to the National Gang Center podcast, Voices from the Field. In each episode, we hear from experts and go in depth about their stories and experience with addressing gangs and communities. This program is supported by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. The points of view and opinions expressed within do not necessarily represent those of the U.S. Department of Justice.
I'm Sean Baldwin with the National Gang Center. Thank you for joining us. In this episode, we're going to discuss safety issues for street outreach professionals working with gang-involved youth. To help us with this, we've brought in an expert in street outreach. Mr. Jay Franklin is a safety manager and gang specialist for the Riverside County Office of Education in Riverside, California. Jay was actually one of the original street outreach workers to implement the comprehensive gang model. And he has more than 25 years of experience working with youth, families, and communities impacted by gangs. Jay, it's great to see you. Welcome to our podcast.
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me.
All right. So, Jay, as we get started here, I want to sort of level up. We've got audience members that have different levels of experience with street outreach. So I want our listeners to know that I'll point out some resources to learn more about street outreach as we close up the show. But to get us started, and for those that don't know much about street outreach, Jay, can you tell us what street outreach is?
Yes. There's many versions out there of outreach, but street outreach is what I call the truth. To me, it's a core concept that a lot of different models they pull from. Street outreach, it has a targeted population of high-risk youth, gang-involved youth, but it's definitely specific and targeted to decrease violence in certain communities. So with that being said, again, street outreach is something that is real work. You help young people navigate through the difficulties that they may be going through.
So because they're out working directly with these gang-involved youth, and street outreach workers let's be real here, they're working in communities that have been impacted by serious crime and violence. How dangerous is this work for these street outreach workers?
Yes, it's extremely dangerous. It's definitely a profession that we have the same mindset of law enforcement. The same way law enforcement feel that I have to come home every day. When we suit up every day to go out there in the field, we have to be prepared. And safety is at the forefront of being prepared to do street outreach.
All right. So, Jay, I'm sure you've been doing this for 25 years, and I'm sure you've got some scary stories that you can tell. Can you give us an example of how dangerous the work is?
Yes. There's a few stories that come to mind. But as I share these stories, if we could keep in mind that there's a safety aspect and there's also an emotional aspect to this work. One particular case, there was a young man earlier in the day. As I mentioned earlier, we help young people navigate through whatever may be going on in their life. There's one particular young man. He was heavily involved in his gang in his neighborhood, but he was also trying to do something different. And he was starting to see like there's more to life and I need to start doing something other than just this. So he contacted me and he wanted to go looking for a job. So we and him were hanging out all afternoon. We have newspaper. We had all these jobs circled in the newspaper. So we had a really good evening, picked up applications. But when I dropped him off in the evening, as soon as I dropped him off, or not long after I dropped him off, a rival gang came by and they actually shot and killed him. And they were just targeting. So street outreach workers, we're not in county vehicles or identified city vehicles. We're in our own personal vehicles. We're just a part of the community that's helping out. So that one really hit me because they were just targeting. So had I been there 5 minutes prior, me and him may have been victims.
Yeah, I can see how that impacts both your safety, your physical safety, and the impact that has on you mentally as you do this work. With that in mind, I'm going to back up just a little bit here before we get into your advice for street outreach workers. How is it that you got into this work? I mean, How is it that you not only got into it, you got started, but you've done it for 25 years? You've made a career out of it. Tell us that story.
Yes, I think it's probably consistent with a lot of people that get into this line of work as far as street outreach. Street outreach is something that it's naturally in you. If you go to neighborhoods throughout the nation, there's older guys and call them OGs from neighborhoods, but they're giving positive advice. But there was never really an avenue for it to be a profession and a job. And a lot of people in the neighborhood, they've changed their lives around, and they just want to give back and to let people know that you can be a part of your neighborhood without participating in some of the illegal activity, but you can still be a major part of your community and be from your community. And when they started seeing that in my particular community with the young people I was working with, and for them to see that you see Jay changed his life and he's doing the right thing and he's trying to guide us, it just really helped me get further with the young people I was working with.
Yeah, this is something that you've got to have a passion for. You got to love this. What keeps you in the game? I mean, what makes you feel good about what you do?
Every morning I wake up with my personal why, and I really, really just revisit that. Um, when you've seen the dark and ugly side of gang violence on a personal level, um, it really digs deep. So to know that I have the opportunity, or the program or outreach work has opportunity to really get in there, not only to change lives, but we're saving lives. To actually save lives and really help community, it's just so huge. So as some things that may happen that may be negative, there's so many positives that comes out of this. And when you have one success with a young person, you just keep reaching for it and wanting more of those. So my why, it definitely keeps me going. And it's kind of in line with why I got into this line of work. My best friend, and how close, and I just understand how close you can go one way or the other. Um, my best friend growing up, we were hanging out one night, and I just said, I'm gonna stay home or I'm gonna stay here. And they went back out. We were hanging out, came back to the house, and they went back out. And when he went back out, he ended up getting into some trouble. Everyone in the car went to jail, went to prison. And I made that choice to not get in the car. But years later, he would say that there's a purpose for that, man. You shouldn't have been in the car that day, or your life possibly could have been my life, and vice versa. So just knowing that there's good in this population, and some people may feel that this is a gang members are a throwaway population because they made this choice. There's so many people in there, if just given opportunity and directed the right way, they're willing to change their lives and they're willing to get back in the right way. And having an outreach program or outreach person that can help them through that and be there for them, it really goes a long way.
So, Jay, this is personal for you. This is not just a job.
Definitely.
Clearly.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's what it takes to get through a career like what you've done, and even my background in law enforcement. It has to be personal. You have to love what you're doing, and you have to believe in the people that you're working with, good or bad. You got to believe in them. That's the way it is. That is awesome. I think it's probably time we get into discussion about how we can keep these street outreach workers safe. I'm sure you've had 25 years. I'm sure you've made some mistakes and had some close calls. How can we keep, street outreach is a growing field, and it's become a profession, not just a job. It's become a profession, and it's a growing field. There's communities all over the nation that are just starting street outreach programs, and I know you've worked with many of them to help bring them up. But I can't help to think that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of brand new outreach workers that don't have the level of experience that you have. So let's talk about how we can keep them safe. Give us your advice.
Yeah, I think on the top of my list would be keeping your hand on the pulse of the community. You have to know the temperature of the neighborhoods. You have to know what's really going on. And the only way you're going to get that is by being out there. Street outreach is not a desk job. It's not something where you get information from another department or another agency. Street outreach workers have to be out there. They have to live this work. And with that being said, I think the number one thing for me was the fact that I really stayed in tune with what was going on in the neighborhoods. And I really knew who was having conflict and what was the level of their conflict. Then you have to get into the particular gangs that you're working with. You know, what's the activity with that gang? A gang may have a lot of numbers, but they may not be an active, violent gang. But within their gang, who's the shooters? Who's the ones that's more apt to commit the violence? So knowing the community, and then once you start knowing the community, then also start knowing your clients. You know, once you get in with your clients and you know what makes them individually tick, it really helps you through the whole process.
That's, in law enforcement, we call that situational awareness, knowing what's going on in your community so that you can keep yourself out of the dangerous parts. But I know there's times, I know when you're doing the intervention or the interruption piece of your
Mm-hmm.
work, when you're actually dealing with hot issues in the community, maybe right after a shooting and trying to prevent some retaliation from another gang, that you're in the middle of that hot zone. I know
Yes.
that for sure. How do you deal with that? I mean, are there extra, in other words, when you know that you're walking into a hot situation, but you're doing it to save lives. I mean, that's what you're doing. I know you're going to do that. Is there anything extra you do during those specific incidents?
Yes, definitely. And one thing, just a mindset is space. You have to have the appropriate space. So let's say if there was, and there's numerous examples I have, where there's a gang related shooting or homicide in one particular house. So we respond. So the family called us, we go out to the house. And while we're at the house, we're talking about young people that's dealing with death and, and grieving and going through that process. And in the gang culture, that kicks up to retaliation. There's really no time to grieve. So with that being said, they're all in retaliation mode. And then with outreach coming in and being that calming voice or that calming presence. But at that particular time, you still have to create space because that's only going to go so far. So you have to make sure that your timing is right. It may not be the time to really push certain things on them. Give them their space. Just one particular situation or example that comes to mind. The homicide happened and the young people were all in the streets and there was some that we were working with. So we're out there talking to them and they were at the actual victim's family's home. So they were being respectful, but they were really going through it. You can see the anger and you can see that they were ready to retaliate. So when I got there, my outreach team, when we arrived, we're talking to them and we can see that they, put their shields down for a little bit. But then when the uncle shows up, there's actually a member from the gang, an older member from the gang. He shows up and when he gets out the car, my first thought was he's going to kick in with this positive and outreach because we're here with the family. But he looked at all the little youngsters that were standing in the street and he told them this was on a Friday night. And he looked them all in the eyes and he told them that I need a body by Sunday.
Wow.
So given that space, and these young people that's already grieving for their homeboy that passed away, but now the OG from their neighborhood, that it was his family member, they felt even more of a responsibility to put in work and take care of that. And the follow-up with outreach, that's when that has to kick in. So it's not that actual immediate response, which is helpful, but the follow-up with that, it took us a month of real work and individual work away from the group setting to really get in there with some of these young people and help to diffuse that violence in those situations.
Yeah. So in the world that I come from, we talk about that in terms of de-escalation, using de-escalation techniques, not only for in the crisis of the moment. You're talking about in the profession that you're in, that may be extended over weeks or months trying to de-escalate a situation. I know that's a really good technique if you're personally threatened, is to use de-escalation when somebody's angry or they're mad or they're grieving. And what we have found is the best way to do that is to acknowledge what the people are feeling and then ask them questions. Say, hey, help me to understand why you're feeling this way. Help me to understand what can be done about it, and involving them in the decision making process. Sometimes, just in a matter of a couple of minutes, you can change something from being being very dangerous to being at least calm for the moment, right?
Yes, yes. And if they have time to just talk it through with someone,
Right.
talk it through and talk through the consequences of that, of your particular actions. Because in our particular city, when it comes down to gang task force and law enforcement, they have their plan in place of how they're going to address gang activity and how they're going to address retaliation. So if your gang was the victim, more than likely they're going to saturate that community, and anyone with weapons, they're going to go after. You're going to possibly be arrested. So just to talk through those scenarios and talk through, what are we really saying here, even though I know you're emotional. And then over time, sometimes it works itself out. And then sometimes, some of these guys are so far gone that they're still going to do what they do. And in the world of street outreach, public safety is number one. We're definitely here to help these young people and hope that they make the right choices and they don't go that route. Right. But as far as being bleeding hearts for gang members and just always wanting to advocate, even if someone's in the wrong, we can only do our best to work with them the best way we can. And I can personally say that over the years, I have numerous success stories of how it worked out and how these young, grown people now are actually giving back, and they're doing outreach because they have the passion in their hearts for what was given to them. So there's numerous examples of how outreach has changed lives, but there's also that other side where there's examples of, incarceration and death that we definitely have to deal with in this line of work.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Let's talk about weapons and what your policies are, what your advice are for street outreach workers carrying weapons while they're doing this work.
Yeah, that shouldn't happen. There's numerous reasons why that can just cause problems. For outreach workers to actually have a weapon on duty, outreach duty or outreach working your shift, so many things could go wrong. And we always say that your weapon is your credibility with working with this population. Wow. And working in the community. That's your weapon. But if you feel that you have to arm yourself to do this work, again, there's so many things that could go wrong. If you leave the weapon in your vehicle, if the clients in the program actually end up with your weapon for however reason that could happen, it's so many things that could possibly go wrong with that. So that's something that we totally don't recommend. And for people to get into this line of work, if that's one of the first questions, can we wear vests or do we need weapons? More than likely, that person isn't going to have success being an outreach worker. A true outreach worker is someone that's comfortable in the community, that understands the community. Streetwise, when we talk about someone that's streetwise, we're talking about de-escalation skills at their highest. We've had situations where it's rival gangs, hands in their pants, about to pull their weapons out, just waiting on the other gang to move first, and to be able to get in there with no backup, nothing but your credibility. Man, calm it down for me, man. I'm here. And we've had numerous situations where that has happened, and they put it down or they put it away for that particular moment. But that particular moment possibly saved a life.
So two things. So your recommendation is that street outreach programs have a policy of no weapons. Is that right?
Definitely.
Okay. So I think that's good advice. I know that you have seen cases where street outreach workers haven't done that. They've carried weapons and they've actually ended up in the hands of gang members. And that's absolutely awful. Man, that credibility is your weapon. That's powerful advice, powerful advice. Appreciate that. Thank you. That gives there's a whole nother way of looking at it in terms of self-defense, for sure. So maybe talk about that a little bit. How important is credibility to safety? What happens if you lose your credibility with these gangs? And I can imagine a dozen or so different ways that you could lose your credibility with these gangs and actually suffer some consequences for that.
Yeah. Just to stress how serious it is. If an outreach worker was to lose credibility, with the gang, it's no different than a rival gang or a gang within itself having an individual that lost credibility. So the safety issues are off the chart at that point. Once you lose credibility, and to really say that, to break it down a little more, there's certain things that definitely matter to gangs. If gangs feel that one of their members is working with law enforcement or doing something against the gang or something to tear the gang down or to pull the members from the gang, you're going against the gang. That's a problem to them. So with street outreach work, we've had it where the older gang members, once the credibility was in place, they would help us round up. Like, man, you're supposed to go to anger management. It's 4 o'clock. We just seen Jay around the corner. Man, he came to pick y'all up. Where the gang members, they still understand and respect the fact that we're doing something in the community to help the young people in the neighborhood. So that's that other level that an outreach worker or outreach component should every day strive to get to. And if something goes on within the community and there's a possibility of there being a perception that this program isn't right, or this program just came here to gather numbers and for statistics, but not really here to help and to set up, all of those types of things, you have to take it serious. And if there's someone spreading something out in the community that's other than the truth, that's very, very important for outreach workers. The same way for a gang member. If a gang member or if his fellow gang members feel that his name isn't right and they feel that something about him isn't right, then he needs to prove that. It's up to him to prove that. And in the gang culture, one of the number one things is paperwork. So with that being said, it's that same mentality that we still have to carry with us also, is that our credibility, it definitely will get us through. And we have to stand on that and stand behind that every day.
So Jay, I know as you're working with your clients, you're building a long-term relationship, sometimes lasting years or a lifetime, right? How do you keep how important is it to keep your private life separated from your professional life?
It's very important, but with this type of work, there's certain things that overlap. If you live in a community, if you work in the community that you live in, those are inevitable that they're going to run together. But how you conduct yourself on a daily basis. I'm not going to work for 8 to 5 as an outreach worker, and then from 5 to 2 in the morning, I'm out there doing, who knows what. And again, it goes back to the credibility.
Right.
So when clients see that, they're looking at that. When I first started doing outreach work, a lot of the clients on my caseload, they knew the other Jay, and they respected me to the point that they were willing to work within the program. So I'm their outreach worker and we're working within the program. But I felt it every day. They were like, man, I hope, is Jay really holding us to this? Like, he's going to pick us up one day and his car is going to smell like weed. Or one day he's going to have a 40 bottle in here. Something's going to happen, or 40 ounces back in the day. So they were waiting, for something. And it never happened, and that just took it even further. They was like, man, if someone that we know that grew up in our neighborhood and that's doing this today, then we can do it also. And for me personally, it went a long way, but you definitely have to have a balance with that, and you have to carry that. Once you get off work, you're still on the clock, and of course this line of work, it is 24/7. So.
Yeah, I've heard people say that credibility and trust take a lifetime to build and a second to destroy. So that's I wouldn't have thought that credibility is a safety issue. So man, that's wisdom for sure. Let's shift gears just a little bit here, and let's talk about mental wellness. I know we were talking about safety, and I think that's what we intended to talk about. Was sort of the physical threats that you may face and how to keep safe in those circumstances. But as I hear you talk, I hear some of the same challenges that law enforcement officers face, and we're just now, as in that profession, starting to recognize the long-term impact of all of this stress and strain on our mental wellness. What advice do you have for taking care of yourself mentally in this profession when you're dealing with all of these critical incidents, losing people that you've built relationships with, and just seeing all this violence in your community?
Yeah, I strongly recommend that any outreach program, and this is from lessons learned, early on, if there's something in place where you have time to debrief, where you have time to talk through what you go through in the course of being an outreach worker. We implemented something where we had a weekly meeting set up for just having that time and knowing that I had an hour every week, whether I wanted to just sit on the couch in the office and not say nothing, but I had a time to talk to someone that was scheduled out. And if someone other than me cared about what I was going through, it went a long way. So my number one thing would be to definitely communicate out, because as an outreach worker, you want what's best for your clients. And again, we're talking about violence at its, highest level. We're talking dealing with death on a daily basis, or the possibility of death. So with that being said, there's a lot that's carried with that. And that outlet to get it out is huge. It's definitely huge. But the emotional piece of it, because one thing with outreach work, if you respond to something, some programs, it's just we're responding and this is what we did in our response. But outreach workers, once you respond, your job is just starting right then. So now the follow-up is real, and the follow-up is crucial. So during that follow-up, that's when the emotional things start kicking in. And now all of that, and to have someone to help you through that, it goes a long way. A real quick example of this, we had a young man that there was another man in the community that was on the run for homicide. So we knew this was an active gang member, and he was on the run for homicide. He was targeting one of our clients while he was on the run. So I'm talking to the client on the phone, and as I'm talking to him on the phone, I'm heading to him to pick him up. And he told me where he was at, but he said that guy had came around earlier looking for him. And as we're talking on the phone, he's telling me the story. He's like, man, here he come right here. Wow. So the guy pulled up on him as we were talking. I can hear him breathing and running. The phone drops. So I'm heading to the last street he told me he was on. So I'm driving into that situation. But the emotional part of that, from that drive and me not talking to him and me thinking that when I get there, I'm driving to a possible murder scene. I'm driving to a possible homicide of someone that I was just on the phone with. So if I share that story that the guy calls me, he was heading to whatever, and I went to pick him up. But all the other things that go with that, everything that was in my mind, just that process of driving to that, is very real. And to think that someone else understands that, or I can talk through that with someone, it really definitely goes a long way. So I strongly recommend that you take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself in this line of work. You have to make sure that you're on point. We have something we're working on now where we're calling it day one. We're approaching every day as if it's day one. That first day of the job, when you had that excitement and you're on point, whether it was safety, whatever it is, but you're just as focused as you can be in this line of work, you have to consistently have that day one mindset.
That is just absolutely awesome advice for any profession that is dealing with these critical incidents, for sure. So, Jay, I'm going to try to wrap it up here, but I want to take you maybe away from safety. I don't know what your response is going to be. I want to give you the opportunity. Like I said, there are hundreds or thousands of brand new street outreach workers there that are new to this field. What's your best advice to them for being successful?
My best advice would be stay true to the work. Stay true to the work. And we call it the work because this is real work. And a lot of times when you get into this field, it's like, wow, it sounded good. It sounded like something I could really do, but it's tough. The work is tough. But as the work gets tough, to work through it, to bring in your partners. For us, just this comprehensive approach, it goes a long way. Reach out to the people around you of the same mindset with the same goal in your community, and trust in it. Trust in the process and the fidelity of outreach. If you stay consistent with it through the ups and downs and understand that you're just trying to get in there to make an end. You're trying to get in there and plant some seeds. And a lot of the young people that I worked with over the years, they didn't get it immediately. It took years. Some of them, it took state prison. But getting out and knowing, man, you did that for me 15 years ago. And I came home and you're still consistently doing this for our neighborhood and for the people in our community. That's just something that I have to admire. And I want to be a part of that. So if you just stay true to the work, that's the one thing I just want to stress that I've seen over the years, that people came in with real good intentions and that passion. But this particular line of work, it can break you down. And to be honest, if for some reason through the process that it's just not working out for you, or you feel that this isn't what you thought it would be, there's a way you can respectfully, move on. Because if you don't have the right motives, commitment, it's deadly. And you can damage not only yourself, you can damage the clients that you're trying to serve also.
Jay, I don't want to stop. I want to keep going. But we got to bring it to a close. Thank you for taking this time, sharing your expertise, your advice, your experience that you've got. I know that there are street outreach workers that are listening to this that are saying to themselves, I want to be like Jay. And I want to encourage all of you to do that, to be like Jay. Jay, thank you. Any final words for us?
I just want to say thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. So if you'd like to hear more from Jay and learn more about street outreach, please visit the National Gang Center's YouTube channel to access a webinar recording that we've done called Addressing Gangs: Effective Street Outreach. We've also published an outreach worker safety tip guide that can be found by searching the National Gang Center's website. Again, thank you all for joining us, and stay safe.
The National Gang Center is committed to informing, equipping, and training communities to prevent gang violence, reduce gang involvement, and suppress gang-related crime. For additional information regarding the National Gang Center, visit nationalgangcenter.ojp.gov. Follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or send us an email at information@nationalgangcenter.gov.